What does it take to lead a nation? For over 200 years, 45 individuals have faced this question, each bringing their own vision to the highest office in America. Some rose to greatness, others stumbled, but all of them changed the course of history. Let's journey through time and discover how these leaders shaped the country we know today. George Washington stepped into uncharted territory. No one had been president before, so he had to figure it out as he went. After commanding the Continental Army to victory, he could have become a king, but instead he chose democracy. He served 2 terms and then walked away, showing the world that power could be given up peacefully. That decision alone set America on a different path than most nations. The second president, John Adams, had big shoes to fill. A brilliant lawyer and fierce advocate for independence, Adams spent years in Europe securing support for the revolution before taking office. His time as president was rocky, filled with conflicts both foreign and domestic, but he became the first leader to call the White House home, even though it was barely finished when he moved in. Thomas Jefferson believed deeply in the power of ideas. The man who wrote that all men are created equal also made one of the boldest moves in American history, purchasing a massive stretch of land from France that doubled the size of the country overnight. The Louisiana Purchase transformed America's future, opening the West to expansion and exploration. When James Madison took office, he inherited a world at war. Britain and France were locked in conflict, and America got caught in the middle. Madison, though small in stature and soft-spoken, guided the nation through the War of 1812. Before becoming president, he had already earned his place in history by drafting much of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. James Monroe presided over what many called a time of unusual harmony. Political divisions seemed to fade, and the country enjoyed a brief moment of unity. But Monroe's most lasting contribution came in the form of a doctrine, a bold statement to European powers: stay out of the Americas. This Monroe Doctrine would influence foreign policy for generations. The 6th president, John Quincy Adams, carried a famous last name and all the expectations that came with it. After his single term in office, he did something unusual. He went back to Congress and spent nearly 2 decades fighting against the expansion of slavery, proving that public service didn't end with the presidency. Then came Andrew Jackson, and everything changed. A rough-edged war hero from Tennessee, Jackson claimed to represent the common man, and millions loved him for it. He expanded voting rights for white men and challenged the power of banks and elites. But his presidency also brought tragedy. He forcibly removed thousands of Native Americans from their lands, leading to suffering and death on a massive scale. Martin Van Buren had the misfortune of taking office just as the economy collapsed. The Panic of 1837 devastated businesses and families across the country, and Van Buren struggled to respond effectively. A masterful political operator, he found himself powerless against economic forces he couldn't control. William Henry Harrison has the unfortunate distinction of the briefest presidency. He gave a lengthy inaugural speech on a cold, wet day in March, refused to wear a coat, and fell ill shortly after. Just 31 days into his term, he died, leaving the nation in shock and raising urgent questions about presidential succession. His vice president, John Tyler, suddenly found himself in charge. No vice president had ever taken over before, and many questioned whether he was truly president or just acting president. Tyler insisted on the full title and powers, setting a precedent that would matter many times in the future. James K. Polk promised to serve only 1 term, and he meant it. In those 4 years, he pursued expansion with relentless energy. Texas joined the Union, a treaty with Britain secured Oregon, and a war with Mexico brought vast new territories in the Southwest. Polk accomplished everything he set out to do and then retired, exhausted. Another military hero, Zachary Taylor, entered office with no political experience. He took firm stands on the brewing crisis over slavery, but we'll never know how his presidency might have unfolded. Like Harrison before him, Taylor died in office after just 16 months, possibly from contaminated food or water. Millard Fillmore stepped into the chaos and tried to hold the country together. He signed the Compromise of 1850, a series of measures meant to ease tensions between North and South over slavery. One part of that compromise, the Fugitive Slave Act, required Northerners to help capture escaped slaves, enraging abolitionists and deepening the divide. Franklin Pierce watched helplessly as the nation splintered. He supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which let new territories decide the slavery question for themselves. The result was violence and bloodshed as pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces battled for control. Pierce's presidency pushed America closer to the breaking point. James Buchanan stood at the edge of the abyss and did nothing. As Southern states began to secede, Buchanan insisted he had no power to stop them. He left office just as the nation was tearing itself apart, passing an impossible situation to his successor. That successor was Abraham Lincoln, and he would not let the Union die. For 4 brutal years, the Civil War raged. Lincoln evolved from a man who merely wanted to contain slavery to one who declared it must end. His Emancipation Proclamation freed enslaved people in rebel states and transformed the war into a fight for human freedom. Just days after the war ended, an assassin's bullet took his life, cutting short what might have been a very different Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson, who took over after Lincoln's death, clashed constantly with Congress over how to rebuild the South. He opposed measures to protect the rights of freed slaves and vetoed civil rights legislation. Congress impeached him, making him the first president to face that fate, though the Senate voted to keep him in office by a single vote. Ulysses S. Grant had won the war as a general, but governing proved more difficult. He genuinely tried to protect Black Americans in the South and supported civil rights, but his administration became notorious for corruption. Scandals erupted around him, though Grant himself remained personally honest. The election of Rutherford B. Hayes was decided not at the ballot box, but through backroom deals. The Compromise of 1877 gave Hayes the presidency in exchange for removing federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction and abandoning Black Americans to decades of oppression. James A. Garfield barely had time to lead. Just months into his term, a deranged office seeker shot him, and Garfield lingered for weeks before dying. His death sparked a movement to reform how government jobs were awarded, ending the corrupt spoils system. His successor, Chester A. Arthur, surprised everyone. Expected to be a typical party hack, Arthur instead championed civil service reform and proved more principled than anyone anticipated. Grover Cleveland made history twice by serving 2 separate terms with another president in between. Known for his stubborn integrity, Cleveland vetoed hundreds of bills he thought were wasteful or corrupt, more than any president before him. In between Cleveland's terms came Benjamin Harrison, grandson of President William Henry Harrison. During his time in office, 6 new states entered the Union, and Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act to limit the power of massive corporations. After Harrison, Cleveland returned, making him both the 22nd and 24th president. William McKinley led America into the 20th century and onto the world stage. The Spanish-American War lasted only a few months, but left the United States in control of territories from Puerto Rico to the Philippines. McKinley was campaigning for re-election when an anarchist shot him in 1901. Then came Theodore Roosevelt, a force of nature. At 42, he became the youngest president ever and brought boundless energy to the job. He battled powerful corporations, protected millions of acres of wilderness, and built the Panama Canal. Roosevelt believed the president should be a moral leader and used the office to fight for the public good. William Howard Taft followed Roosevelt and found himself caught between his predecessor's expectations and his own more cautious temperament. Though he continued antitrust efforts, Taft disappointed progressives. Years later, he achieved his real ambition, becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Woodrow Wilson guided America through World War I, though he had tried to keep the country neutral. After the war, he championed the League of Nations, an organization meant to prevent future conflicts, but the Senate rejected it. During his presidency, women finally won the right to vote nationwide with the 19th Amendment. Warren G. Harding promised normalcy after the chaos of war, and Americans embraced his relaxed style. But his administration became mired in scandal, including the Teapot Dome affair, where officials took bribes to lease government oil reserves. Harding died suddenly in 1923, his reputation in tatters. Calvin Coolidge believed the best government was the one that governed least. Quiet and restrained, he presided over the booming 1920s, a time of prosperity and cultural change. The stock market soared, jazz filled the airwaves, and most Americans felt confident about the future. That confidence shattered under Herbert Hoover. A brilliant engineer and humanitarian, Hoover seemed perfectly qualified when he took office in 1929. Then the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. Despite his efforts, the economy spiraled downward, and desperate Americans blamed him for their suffering. Franklin Delano Roosevelt promised a New Deal, and he delivered. Despite being paralyzed from the waist down by polio, FDR projected strength and optimism. His alphabet soup of programs, from the CCC to the Social Security Act, reshaped the relationship between government and citizens. When World War II came, he led the Allies against fascism. Americans elected him 4 times, trusting him through depression and war. He died just before victory. Harry Truman made some of history's hardest decisions. Should he use the atomic bomb to end the war with Japan? He said yes, and 2 cities were destroyed. After the war, Truman helped rebuild Europe and stood firm against Soviet expansion during the early Cold War. He committed American forces to Korea and desegregated the military. Dwight Eisenhower came to the presidency as a genuine war hero. During his 8 years in office, America prospered and the interstate highway system transformed the nation. When Arkansas defied federal orders to integrate schools, Eisenhower sent in troops, showing that the government would enforce civil rights laws. John F. Kennedy inspired a generation with his youth and charisma. He challenged Americans to ask what they could do for their country and promised to put a man on the moon. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world came terrifyingly close to nuclear war, but Kennedy navigated the standoff carefully. His assassination in Dallas shocked the world and ended what many called Camelot. Lyndon Johnson took office in that moment of grief and pushed through ambitious programs to fight poverty and racism. The Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act transformed American society. Johnson's Great Society created Medicare and poured resources into education. But the Vietnam War grew into a quagmire that consumed his presidency and divided the country bitterly. Richard Nixon opened diplomatic relations with Communist China and signed important arms control treaties with the Soviet Union. He pulled American troops out of Vietnam and created the Environmental Protection Agency. But Nixon's presidency ended in disgrace. The Watergate scandal revealed he had covered up illegal activities, and facing certain impeachment, he became the first president to resign. Gerald Ford inherited a nation exhausted by scandal and war. His decision to pardon Nixon was deeply controversial, but Ford believed it was necessary for the country to heal and move forward. He worked to restore trust in government during difficult economic times. Jimmy Carter emphasized human rights in foreign policy and negotiated peace between Egypt and Israel. At home, he faced economic troubles including high inflation and unemployment. His presidency was overshadowed by the Iran hostage crisis. After leaving office, Carter devoted himself to humanitarian work around the world. Ronald Reagan brought a sunny optimism to the presidency. His economic policies, cutting taxes and regulations, appealed to many Americans even as they increased inequality. Reagan challenged the Soviet Union, famously demanding they tear down the Berlin Wall. His presidency restored confidence for many, though critics argued his policies favored the wealthy. George H.W. Bush brought decades of experience to the office. He assembled an international coalition to push Iraq out of Kuwait and witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union, ending the Cold War. Despite success abroad, a recession at home cost him re-election. Bill Clinton presided over the longest peacetime economic expansion in American history. The federal budget balanced for the first time in decades, and unemployment dropped. He signed NAFTA, connecting North American economies. But his affair with a White House intern led to impeachment, though the Senate acquitted him. George W. Bush took office after a disputed election decided by the Supreme Court. Everything changed on September 11, 2001, when terrorists attacked New York and Washington. Bush launched wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that would last for years. He pushed through tax cuts and education reform, while the war on terror reshaped American life. Barack Obama broke a barrier that once seemed impossible, becoming the first African-American president. He passed the Affordable Care Act, extending health insurance to millions. His administration rescued the auto industry and oversaw economic recovery from the Great Recession. He emphasized diplomacy and multilateralism while expanding the use of drone strikes against terrorists. Donald Trump brought a confrontational style and an outsider's approach to the presidency. He cut corporate taxes significantly, appointed conservative judges, and challenged traditional alliances. His America First agenda reshaped trade policy and immigration enforcement. Trump was impeached twice by the House, but acquitted both times by the Senate. His refusal to accept the 2020 election results culminated in the January 6th Capitol riot. Joe Biden took office during the pandemic and pushed through major relief legislation. He rejoined international climate agreements and worked to restore traditional alliances. His infrastructure bill promised to rebuild American roads, bridges, and broadband. Biden focused on voting rights, gun safety, and supporting Ukraine against Russian invasion. Now, as of 2025, Donald Trump has returned to the White House, becoming only the second president to serve non-consecutive terms. His second presidency continues the populist agenda of his first term, with executive actions on immigration, trade, and deregulation taking center stage. The battles over his policies remain as intense as ever. From Washington's precedent-setting leadership to the modern challenges of today, the American presidency has evolved beyond anything the founders might have imagined. Each leader brought their own strengths and flaws, their own vision of what America should be. Some rose to meet historic challenges, others fell short, but together, they tell the story of a nation constantly reinventing itself. Which president do you think understood their moment best? Drop your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world.